It had been a long week, the kind that pressed on the chest even after the uniform came off. The woman moved through the city streets with steady focus, one hand resting lightly on her son's shoulder as they walked. She wore plain clothes, nothing that hinted at rank or authority. Tonight was not about commands or briefings. It was about time she had promised, but often failed to give. Her son walked beside her, taller than he had been just months ago. He spoke about school, about a science project he was worried about how quiet the house felt when she was away. She listened closely, nodding, asking small questions, letting him know he mattered. She knew too well how easily silence could grow between people when life became busy. They stopped in front of a modest restaurant. It was not fancy, but it was warm and familiar, a place where families came to eat after work. The smell of cooked food drifted out each time the door opened. She chose it on purpose. She wanted a place where no one would look twice at her, where she could just be a mother for one evening. Got inside. The restaurant hummed with low voices and the clink of plates. They were shown to a small table near the window. Her son slid into his seat, already scanning the menu with interest. She smiled at him, grateful for this simple moment. Too many dinners had been missed. Too many birthdays celebrated through video calls. As they waited, her eyes moved around the room without thinking. Years of training made it hard not to observe. She noticed the tired waitress balancing too many plates, the older couple sharing one dessert, the family at the corner table trying to calm a crying child. And then she noticed the janitor. He moved quietly, pushing a worn mop along the floor, careful not to disturb anyone. His clothes were clean but old, the kind that had been washed too many times. His shoulders were slumped in a way that spoke of long hours and little rest. As he cleaned near their table, she saw his phone light up in his pocket. He paused, wiped his hands, and checked the screen quickly. His face softened for just a second. Then it tightened again with worry. He typed a short reply and slipped the phone away, glancing toward the kitchen as if afraid someone might see. He went back to work, scrubbing a small stain near a chair leg that most people would not even notice. Her son followed her gaze. "He looks tired," he said quietly. She nodded. "Some people carry more than they show." A loud voice cut through the room. A man at another table complained about a spill near his feet. The janitor hurried over, apologizing before the man even finished speaking. He knelt down, wiping the floor quickly, his head lowered. The man continued to talk, his tone sharp, blaming the janitor for something that was clearly an accident. The janitor did not argue. He simply said sorry again and moved on. Something tightened in her chest. She had seen that posture before, that way of making oneself smaller to avoid trouble. She had seen it in young recruits, in people who felt they had no room to make mistakes. Her son frowned. That wasn't fair. "No," she said softly. It wasn't. Their food arrived, and they began to eat. The conversation drifted back to lighter things, but her mind kept returning to the man with the mop. She watched as he cleaned table after table, never stopping, never resting. Once, he leaned against a counter for just a moment, closing his eyes before straightening again. When the restaurant quieted a little, she saw him sit at a small table near the back. He took out his phone again, this time holding it longer. His lips moved as if he were counting or planning. He rubbed his face with one hand, exhaustion clear in the slow movement. A message came in, and his shoulders sagged. He typed back quickly, then stood up, returning to work without finishing whatever thought he had been having. Her son noticed too. "Do you think he has kids?" "Maybe," she said. "Parents often worry like that." The boy nodded, thoughtful. He had grown up around strong people, disciplined people. But this was different. This was quiet strength, unseen and unpraised. As they finished their meal, a small accident happened nearby. A child knocked over a glass, sending water across the floor. The janitor rushed over again, smiling gently at the embarrassed child, telling him it was okay. He cleaned the mess, then gave the child a quick thumbs up before moving on. The woman felt a familiar pull, the one that came when she sensed someone standing at a turning point. She had learned to trust that feeling, even when she did not fully understand it yet. They paid the bill and stood to leave. As they walked toward the door, she slowed near where the janitor was working. She waited until he finished wiping a table and spoke. "Excuse me," she said. He looked up, surprised. "Yes, ma'am?" "Thank you for keeping this place so clean," she said simply. He blinked, clearly not expecting that. "Oh, thank you," he replied, his voice careful, as if unsure whether this was real. She smiled, warm and genuine. "Long night?" He hesitated, then nodded. "They usually are." Her son stood beside her, quiet but attentive. "You do good work," she added. "People notice, even if they don't always say it." The janitor gave a small smile, the kind that did not quite reach his eyes. "I just do what I can." There was more she wanted to ask, but she sensed his guard. She did not want to push. Some stories open slowly. "Well," she said, "I hope you get some rest soon." "Me too," he said with a soft laugh. "Have a good night." As they stepped outside, the cool air brushing their faces, her son looked up at her. "You didn't tell him who you are." She shook her head. "Tonight, that doesn't matter." They walked to the car in silence for a moment. Then her son spoke again. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Do you ever wonder how many people like him there are?" She stopped walking. She looked back at the restaurant window, where she could still see the janitor moving in the background, steady and unseen. "All the time," she said. "And I wonder how many times we walk past them without really seeing them." That night, long after her son had fallen asleep, she sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. She thought about the janitor's tired eyes, the way he checked his phone, the patience he showed even when treated poorly. She had faced difficult decisions before. She had led people into danger and brought them home. She knew how one choice could change many lives. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this dinner was not over. Not yet. It had been several days since that quiet dinner with her son. The memory of the janitor stayed with her, his tired but steady movements, the way he handled every small challenge with patience. She couldn't stop thinking about him. There was something in the way he carried himself, a quiet dignity that didn't belong to someone who spent long nights cleaning floors. It made her wonder about his story, what life had shaped him into this man who kept going no matter what. She decided to return to the restaurant, this time alone. The night was cool, and the city lights reflected on the wet streets from an earlier rain. She wanted to see him again, not as a figure in a fleeting moment, but to understand the person behind the uniform of labor he carried without complaint. Inside the restaurant, the familiar smells and sounds welcomed her. The low hum of conversation, the clink of plates, and the soft laughter of a family in the corner made her feel grounded. She spotted him immediately, pushing a mop along the same path he had the other night. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, but there was a softness to them, a human tenderness that showed even in small gestures. When he noticed her, he paused. There was no recognition, and that was exactly how she wanted it. She approached the counter and ordered a cup of coffee, keeping her eyes on him. She listened as he spoke briefly with the manager. A few words were exchanged, but the tension in his shoulders was clear. She realized the job demanded much more than physical effort. It demanded constant attention, patience, and the ability to absorb the stress of others while remaining calm. Her curiosity grew. She moved to a small table near the back where she could watch without intruding. She noticed how the janitor handled situations that most people ignored. A spilled drink at one table, a chair slightly out of place, a napkin dropped on the floor, all met with quiet attention. He never sighed audibly, never made excuses. It was as though his job wasn't a burden, but a responsibility he carried with honor. The general thought about her own life, about her son and the rare moments they shared. How easily she could give orders, command attention, and make things happen. Yet she had never seen someone command respect in the simplest ways, without words or recognition. She felt an unusual pull, a connection to this man she didn't know, a silent respect that grew with every action he took. A sudden commotion at a nearby table drew her attention. A customer was upset about a small mistake in their order. They raised their voice, making demands, pointing fingers at the waiter. The janitor stepped in, quickly wiping the table and adjusting the cutlery. He spoke softly to the angry customer, apologizing without admitting fault, his voice calm and unshakable. The customer continued to complain, but he maintained his composure, never raising his voice. The general watched closely. She had faced people in high positions who could intimidate with a word, and yet here was a man with no rank, no title, no formal power, and he commanded a room with nothing but patience and presence. It made her think about how often the world ignored quiet strength. How often people assumed the value of a person based on the wrong things. Her son's voice came to her memory. "Do you think he has kids?" He had asked that night, and she had only said, "Maybe." Now she thought she could guess. There was a carefulness in his movements, a tenderness in small gestures, that often belonged to parents who carried unseen burdens for their children. She saw him pause for a moment, leaning against the wall to catch his breath. His phone lit up, and he glanced at it quickly before returning to his work. There was worry in his eyes, a flicker of something personal and private. She wondered what message had come, what responsibility waited for him beyond the restaurant doors. She wanted to ask, but she knew better than to intrude. Some stories revealed themselves slowly, if they were meant to. The night moved on, and the restaurant began to empty. The janitor continued, pushing the mop steadily, wiping the floor near the tables, arranging chairs with care. It was a quiet rhythm, almost meditative, a reflection of someone who found order in chaos. She realized that every movement, every small correction, was a message about who he was, someone who cared even when no one noticed, someone who took pride in what others dismissed as insignificant. She ordered another cup of coffee, sipping slowly as she watched. The manager came by, handing him a stack of napkins. They spoke briefly, laughing softly at some private joke. For a moment, she saw a side of him she hadn't noticed before. He was not just tired, not just patient, not just hardworking. He was human. He laughed, he paused, he cared. And somehow, that made him stronger than she had imagined. When the final customers left, he began stacking chairs at the tables. She noticed how careful he was, making sure each one was perfectly aligned. The precision reminded her of soldiers she had led, how discipline and care could shape outcomes even in small, overlooked moments. It struck her that this man, with no rank and no medals, was exercising leadership in his own way. A waitress approached him, asking if he needed help. He shook his head, smiling briefly. There was gratitude in his expression, but no pride. Just acknowledgement of support offered. It was subtle, but it said everything. She realized that in every interaction, he respected people, even when respect was not returned in kind. Doubt. Her son's question echoed again. "Do you think he has kids?" She thought about the small gestures she had noticed, the glance at his phone, the gentle smile at a child, the careful way he avoided hurting anyone with his words or actions. She believed he did. She could imagine him tucking a child in at night, checking that homework was done, making sure dinner was ready. She could imagine the exhaustion that followed, And yet he returned to work each day with steady resolve. The general stood slowly, finishing her coffee. She had learned enough to know she wanted to do something, but not yet. She wanted to see more, understand more, before acting. She left a small tip and made her way to the door, pausing to glance back. He was still moving through the restaurant, still caring for the details, still quiet, still strong. As she stepped outside, the city air wrapped around her. The lights reflected on the pavement, casting long shadows of people passing by. She thought about the lives that went unnoticed each day, about the struggles carried in silence, and about the small ways people could change the world simply by being kind and responsible. Her son would ask her again the next day what she had seen. And she would tell him, in part, because some lessons were learned slowly. Some people taught by example, without words or recognition, and their stories were worth noticing. She wanted her son to understand that strength came in many forms, and sometimes it came in quiet, unseen acts that shaped lives in ways the world never recorded. That night, when she returned home, she sat alone with a cup of tea. She replayed every detail of the janitor's evening, every subtle gesture, every quiet act of patience. She thought about the exhaustion he must feel, and the love he must carry silently. She realized she could not ignore it. She needed to understand more, needed to see the man again, and needed to see the world from his perspective, even for a short time. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that when she returned, something would change not just for him, but for her and her son as well. There were moments in life that arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, and yet they had the power to shift everything. This was one of those moments, and she felt it in her chest like a small, persistent heartbeat, reminding her that true strength often went unseen. Her son's quiet voice drifted to her memory again. "Do you think he's happy?" She didn't know the answer yet, but she hoped that she might find out, and in finding out, she could perhaps do something that would matter, something that could change a life quietly but profoundly. The janitor had no idea he had been noticed. Yet in the silence of her thoughts, in the reflection of his actions, he had already made an impression that would not fade. And she knew, deep down, that some stories were meant to unfold slowly, like rivers cutting through stone, shaping the world in ways that only became clear with time. That evening ended quietly, but it was not the end. It was only the beginning of something larger, a story that had started with a glance, a mop, and the quiet dignity of a man who gave everything without asking for anything in return. The restaurant was quieter than usual that evening. The hum of conversation had softened to occasional whispers, and the faint clinking of plates being cleared. She had returned, this time without her son. He was at a friend's house for a school project, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the city lights that spilled through the windows. She found a small table where she could watch the room without being obvious. Her eyes immediately found him. He moved through the tables with the same careful attention she had noticed before. Each chair straightened, each table wiped down with precision, every corner checked twice. There was a rhythm to his movements, a method in the way he cared for the restaurant. She imagined that same rhythm applied to his life outside these walls, the same focus, the same quiet determination. She watched him pause near the back, leaning slightly to check a spill that had gone unnoticed. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and for a moment he hesitated. He pulled it out quickly, read a short message, and his face changed. There was worry, a flicker of something private and important, and then, almost immediately, it was gone. He returned to work as though nothing had happened. She thought about how many people carried burdens in silence. She had seen it in her soldiers, in her colleagues, and even in her own life at times. But there was something different about this man. He carried his responsibilities without complaint, without showing the strain he must feel. It was rare, and it was quietly remarkable. As she sipped her coffee, she noticed a small boy at one of the nearby tables drop his fork. The janitor was immediately there, picking it up and handing it back to the child with a gentle smile. "There you go," he said softly. The boy smiled shyly, and the janitor moved on. She felt a tug in her chest. There was tenderness in the way he interacted with children, a patience that went beyond mere politeness. She imagined him doing the same for his own child, if he had one. The thought stayed with her. She had to know. She had to understand who he was, not just what he did. After a few minutes, she saw him take a short break, leaning against the wall and rubbing his face. That was her opening. She approached him slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me," she said gently. He looked up, eyes wary but polite. "Yes, I just wanted to say thank you," she said, "for everything you do here. You make a difference, even if people don't always notice." He blinked, surprised. "Oh, thank you," he said quietly. I just do my job." "That's exactly it," she said, smiling. "Doing your job well, caring about the details, it matters. A lot more than you might think." He looked down at the floor, shifting uncomfortably. "I guess it's just what I have to do. Life doesn't leave much choice." She hesitated, then decided to take a small risk. "Do you have a family?" she asked softly. He paused. For a moment, she thought he might walk away, but then he shook his head slightly. "Just a son," he said. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as though sharing the truth carried weight. Her heart tightened. She had guessed correctly. That same careful attention, that patience, that quiet strength, it was all rooted in responsibility, in love for someone he had to care for alone. "How old is he?" she asked. 8, he replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "He keeps me busy, keeps me grounded, I guess." She nodded, understanding more than he knew. She had carried burdens herself, known what it meant to be responsible for someone who depended entirely on her. "He's lucky to have you," she said sincerely. He shrugged, humility clear in the gesture. "I do what I have to. Life doesn't really give you choices sometimes." "Maybe not," she said, "but you still make the choice to care, and that makes all the difference." For a moment, he looked at her, and she saw a flicker of something she hadn't expected. Relief. Relief that someone had noticed, that someone had acknowledged the quiet effort it took to keep going every day. "I appreciate that," he said finally, voice steadier. "Not many people notice," she smiled gently. "Sometimes the people who notice don't have to be many. Just one person can matter." The manager walked by, calling out a question, and the janitor excused himself. She watched him move away, the brief connection lingering in the air. She wanted to follow, to ask more, but she knew it was not the time. Some stories opened slowly, and forcing them spoiled the moment. Instead, she returned to her seat and watched him continue his work. Every gesture, every careful step, told a story she could not yet fully hear. She imagined the mornings when he woke early, the nights when he stayed up late, making sure his son was safe, fed, and loved. She imagined the exhaustion that must weigh on him and the small triumphs that kept him going. Her mind drifted to her own son. How quickly he was growing. How much she wanted to teach him about life, about respect, about noticing people who carried burdens quietly. She realized that her lesson for him could start here, in this moment. Watching a man who embodied the kind of quiet courage that shaped lives without recognition. Minutes passed, and she finally left the restaurant. Outside, the city was alive with movement and light. Cars passed by. People hurried to their destinations, unaware of the small acts of care happening inside that restaurant. She felt the weight of it, the responsibility to see, to understand, and perhaps to act. Her thoughts returned to the janitor's son. How often did the boy get to feel the pride of his father? How often did he see that what his father did mattered beyond the walls of their home? She realized that recognition could change lives, that seeing someone's effort could give them strength they did not know they had. Over the next few days, she found herself thinking about him constantly. She wondered what his mornings were like, how he managed school drop-offs, homework, meals, and work. She imagined the sacrifices he made, the quiet exhaustion, the small joys hidden in a life that demanded more than it gave. Then she made a decision. She would speak to him again, and this time she would not leave without understanding more. She would listen to his story, not to judge, not to offer advice, but simply to hear. Some people carried their lives alone, and sometimes a moment of connection could make an enormous difference. The next visit to the restaurant felt different. She arrived early, sitting quietly and watching him move through the tables. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a quiet hope that this time she might reach him in a way she had not before. When he finished his first round of cleaning, she approached him again. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" she asked gently. He paused, wiping his hands on his pants. "Sure," he said, cautious but polite. She gestured to a small empty table. "Just for a minute. I'd like to hear your story, if you're willing." He hesitated, then nodded. There was a wariness in his eyes, the kind that came from years of keeping life close and private. But something in her tone, in the calm certainty she carried, made him trust her just enough to sit. For the next hour, they talked quietly. He spoke in small pieces, fragments of his life that revealed both struggle and strength. He told her about being a single parent, about working long hours to make ends meet, about the exhaustion that never seemed to end. But he also spoke about the small victories, the first time his son rode a bike, the nights they read together before bed, the quiet pride of knowing he was doing everything he could. She listened without interruption, letting him speak, letting the story unfold. She realized that listening was as powerful as any action. To hear someone's life without judgment, without expectation, was a rare gift. When he finally paused, she looked at him and said simply, "You are stronger than you know." He laughed softly, almost embarrassed. "I just do what I have to." "And that is enough," she replied. "It's more than enough." As they stood to leave, the world outside seemed unchanged, but inside, something had shifted. A connection had been made, a quiet understanding that sometimes the smallest moments, the noticing, the listening, were enough to begin changing a life. She left the restaurant that night with a new sense of purpose. She would find a way to help, not to control or direct, but to support. Some people were meant to meet at the right moment, to see each other clearly, and to act in ways that mattered. This was one of those moments, and she would not let it pass unnoticed. And somewhere, in the quiet of the city, the janitor returned to his work, unaware that someone had seen him in a way that could change everything. The seed of change had been planted, and all it required now was patience, care, and the courage to act at the right time. The morning light was pale and soft as she stepped out of her apartment. The city streets were already alive with people hurrying to work, buses rolling past, vendors calling out their early deals. She moved with a purpose today, a plan forming quietly in her mind. The janitor's story had stayed with her for days, and she had thought long about what she could do not to control his life, but to create an opportunity that might ease the weight he carried. She arrived at the restaurant early, before it opened to the public. The janitor was already there, unlocking the doors and preparing the floors. His movements were steady, even though the tired lines on his face told the story of long nights and early mornings. He noticed her immediately, but didn't recognize her at first. That was fine. She wanted him to be himself, not someone performing for attention. "Good morning," she said softly. He looked up, a little startled. "Good morning," he replied cautiously. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," she said. "I wanted to speak with the manager first, if that's okay." He nodded, curious but not alarmed. "Of course. I'll check with them." She met the manager in the back office. He was surprised to see her so early, but she explained that she had something important to discuss about one of his employees. She described the janitor, highlighting his dedication, his patience, and the way he had handled himself under pressure. She did not exaggerate. She simply told the truth. The manager listened carefully. "He's a good worker," he said, "but I don't think people fully realize how much he does. He's quiet, keeps to himself, but he's one of the most reliable people I've had." "That's exactly it," she said. "I want to help him, but I need your cooperation." The manager nodded, sensing the seriousness in her tone. He agreed to give her the opportunity to speak with the janitor directly in a private space. When she returned, she asked him to follow her to a quiet back room in the restaurant. He hesitated, sensing something different in her tone, but curiosity got the better of him. "Have a seat," she said gently. "I wanted to speak with you about something important." He sat cautiously, hands folded, eyes wary. "All right," he said, waiting. She took a deep breath. "I know you've had a hard time. I know you work long hours, care for your son, and still manage to keep this place running with patience and dedication. I've noticed, and I think the world should notice too." He shook his head slightly. I just do what I have to. Nobody owes me anything." "Maybe not," she said. "But that doesn't mean your life can't be easier, or that opportunities shouldn't come your way. I've looked into a few things, and I think I can help." He blinked, unsure what to say. "Help, yes," she said. "You're capable, strong, and responsible, but your talent isn't limited to cleaning tables. There are opportunities, education, a stable position, resources for your son that I want you to consider." He leaned back, mouth slightly open. I don't understand. Why? Why would you do this for me?" She smiled softly. "Because I can. Because I've seen people like you who work quietly, who carry burdens without complaint. And I know that with a little support, you can do more than you ever imagined. You shouldn't have to struggle alone when there are ways to make life better." For the first time, he seemed to relax, though a mix of disbelief and hesitation remained in his eyes. "I don't know. I don't even know where to start." "Start here," she said. "We can arrange schooling, a position connected to my network, and childcare support for your son. You would have a chance to grow, to provide a stable life for him, without sacrificing your own potential." He shook his head slowly, overwhelmed. I don't know if I deserve that." She leaned forward. "It's not about deserving. It's about giving someone the chance to thrive. You've proven your strength in ways most people overlook. Now it's time to let someone see it and to help you carry the weight a little less alone." He stayed silent for a long moment. His mind seemed to be racing, weighing possibilities he had never dared to imagine. She waited patiently, letting him process. Finally, he spoke. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," she said. "I just want to see you succeed, to see you stand tall without the constant pressure you've been carrying for so long." She handed him a folder with details information about the program, the position, support for his son. His hands trembled slightly as he took it, eyes scanning the pages. He looked up at her, almost in disbelief. This is real?" "It is," she said firmly. "It's real. And it's yours if you're willing to take it." He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. I don't know what to say. I've never had anything like this." "Then don't say anything yet," she said softly. "Just take it one step at a time. Start with what feels right for you and your son. Everything else will follow. Over the next few days, she helped him navigate the process. She introduced him to contacts who could support his education and career development. She arranged for childcare assistance, ensuring his son could thrive without constant worry. She watched as the man, who had carried so much alone, began to open up to the idea that life could be different. For the first time in years, he felt hope. He felt that the weight on his shoulders could be shared, that someone had seen him, not for what he did for money or as a necessity, but for the quiet strength he had shown through years of hardship. When he finally met with the people who would guide him through this new opportunity, she stood nearby, observing. He was nervous at first, unsure of how to navigate a world that had previously felt close to him. But slowly he gained confidence. Each small step, each new piece of knowledge, reinforced what she already knew. He had the courage and intelligence to succeed, if only given the chance. One afternoon, as he returned from a meeting, he found her waiting outside the restaurant. His son was at school, giving him a moment of quiet reflection. "I still can't believe this," he said, shaking his head. "It feels unreal." "It's real," she said, smiling. "And it's only the beginning. You've done the hard part all these years now. It's time for life to support you in return." He looked at her. Gratitude and humility mingled in his expression. "I don't even know how to explain this. How can someone like you care about someone like me?" She shook her head softly. "It's not about who I am, or who you are. It's about recognizing what matters, your effort, your courage, your love for your son. That's what matters." He stood quietly, absorbing her words. For once, he didn't have to carry everything alone. The burden of constant responsibility had been lightened, if only a little, by the belief and support of someone who had seen him truly. As they parted that day, he felt a sense of possibility he had not felt in years. He returned to work with a lighter step, a quieter confidence. He began to see life in a different way, not just as endless struggle, but as a series of choices, some of which could lead to real change. She returned home that evening and called her son. She described the progress, careful not to overstate or dramatize. She wanted him to understand that helping someone wasn't always about grand gestures. It could be as simple as noticing, listening, and providing support where it was possible. Her son listened wide-eyed. "So he's really going to have a better life?" "Yes," she said, "because someone saw him. And now he can see himself differently, too." The janitor never fully understood how much his life had shifted in just a few days. He only knew that the future suddenly seemed less heavy, less impossible. He had been given a chance, and with that chance came hope. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Not pride, not recognition, but a deep, human understanding of what it meant to notice someone who often went unseen, and to act in a way that could truly change a life. From that day forward, small changes began to ripple through his world. His son's laughter was louder, his evenings less stressful, his mornings filled with the possibility of a better day. And all because someone had chosen to see him, not just as a janitor, not just as a man struggling, but as a person of value, of courage, and of quiet, unwavering strength. That was the unthinkable act she had promised herself she would perform. And in doing it, she had not only changed his life, or reminded herself and her son what it meant to see the world with compassion and purpose. Even in the smallest of moments, months passed since the day she had stepped into the restaurant with a purpose. Life had shifted quietly, almost imperceptibly, for the janitor and his son. The man who had once spent every waking hour juggling exhaustion and responsibility now moved with a lighter step. There was hope in the way he smiled, a sense of confidence that had been buried under years of struggle. His son noticed it too, and laughter came more freely now, filling their small apartment with warmth they had not felt before. The general visited occasionally, always unobtrusively, never seeking recognition, simply checking in to see how things were unfolding. She watched from a distance one afternoon as the janitor and his son left the local library, books in hand, their faces bright with excitement. The boy carried a stack of colorful books, eager to read, while his father held the hand of a younger child, careful not to let him slip ahead. She felt a quiet pride, not hers, but in the life that was beginning to grow steadily before her eyes. It had been months of slow, steady change. The janitor had begun training in a position she had arranged through her contacts, a role connected to base facilities that allowed him to use his practical skills in a new environment. The work was different, yes, but familiar enough to give him confidence. He was learning new tasks, meeting new colleagues, and each day he returned home a little more sure of himself. The exhaustion remained, of course, but it was tempered now by purpose and opportunity, not just necessity. One evening, she decided to take her son to visit the facility where he now worked. Her son had grown in understanding since that first dinner. He had witnessed the small acts of kindness and recognition that had begun to change a life and wanted to see the man who had taught him such a powerful lesson firsthand. They arrived quietly, stepping into the buzzing facility with its steady rhythm of work and activity. The janitor looked up from his station, surprised to see visitors. When he recognized her and her son, his eyes widened, a mixture of gratitude and awkwardness flickering across his face. "I wasn't expecting this," he said quietly. "That's okay," she said, smiling. "We just wanted to see how things are going." Her son stepped forward. "Hi," he said simply. "It's good to see you again." The janitor nodded, glancing down at his hands before looking back at them. You've come a long way," she said softly, more to herself than him. "And so have you." He felt an unfamiliar warmth in her words. It was not praise, not something he could brush off, but a genuine acknowledgement of the effort, courage, and resilience that had carried him through years of struggle. He realized that for the first time in a long time, someone saw him for who he really was, not just a man doing a job, but a father, a provider, and a person capable of growth and change. Her son watched quietly, observing the small signs of transformation, the confidence in the janitor's stance, the easy way he interacted with colleagues, the way his eyes held a light that had been missing before. It was a lesson the boy would carry for the rest of his life, that seeing people, truly seeing them, could change the course of their story. After a few minutes, the janitor led them on a short tour of the facility. He showed them the areas where he had learned new skills, the stations he had mastered, and the ways in which he was contributing to the operation. She noticed the pride in his movements, the subtle joy in sharing his progress. For him, it was not about showing off, but about acknowledging the hard work he had put in and the changes it had brought to his life. At the end of the tour, they paused in a small break room. The janitor looked out the window, taking in the view, then turned back to them. "I never thought life could feel like this," he said quietly. "It's not perfect, and there's still a lot to figure out, but it feels possible now." "That's what I hoped for you," she said gently. "A chance to see that you are capable, that your efforts matter, and that your son has a future full of possibilities." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't know how to thank you enough. I'll never forget what you've done." "You don't need to thank me," she replied. "Just keep moving forward. Keep caring for your son. Keep doing your best and continue to grow. That's all that matters." Her son stepped forward, holding out a small handmade drawing. "This is for you," he said shyly. "Just to say thank you too." The janitor took it gently, looking at the colorful lines and the words scribbled across the page. "Thank you," he said softly, touched. "I'll treasure this." The moment felt quiet, profound, and simple all at once. It was a reminder that small acts, attention, recognition, support, could ripple out in ways that touched lives deeply. The janitor realized that his world had been reshaped not by wealth, not by power, but by someone who had seen him, believed in him, and acted to make a difference. Months turned into a full year. The janitor had settled into his new role, and his son thrived in school. Evenings were quieter, filled with reading, homework, and laughter. The weight of constant struggle had eased, replaced by a sense of possibility. The man who had once spent every hour consumed with survival now carried hope, and that hope reflected in the life of his child. The general watched all of this quietly, sometimes from afar, sometimes in moments like today, when she could see the transformation firsthand. She had learned a lesson, too, that leadership was not about authority or titles, but about recognizing humanity, seeing the strength in others, and providing opportunities when they were needed most. One afternoon, she took her son back to the facility again. The janitor greeted them with a smile that was confident, steady, and warm. He walked them through the areas where he worked, introducing colleagues who had already come to respect him. His son watched closely, noticing how the respect he now received was not forced, not based on who he was before, but earned through quiet strength and consistency. After the tour, they sat outside on a small bench. The sun was low in the sky, casting golden light across the courtyard. The janitor's son ran ahead, chasing a ball with a friend. The man watched him, a smile on his face, and then looked at the general. "You were right," he said quietly. This really did change everything. I never thought someone would care enough to make it happen." She nodded. "Sometimes people just need to be seen. And when they are, it can make all the difference." He looked out at his son and back at her, eyes bright. "I want to make sure he knows how to see people too. How to notice, how to care, how to act. That's what I want to teach him. That's the right lesson," she said softly. "And you've already begun." As the sun dipped lower, the man's son ran back, breathless but happy. He hugged his father tightly, and the man hugged him back, feeling the weight of love and responsibility, now tempered with possibility and support. The general and her son watched quietly. They did not speak much. Words were not necessary. The sight was enough the proof that small acts of recognition, of support, of human connection, could ripple out and transform lives. Weeks later, the janitor had adjusted fully to his new role. He managed responsibilities with confidence, guided his son through schoolwork and bedtime routines with patience, and still found moments to laugh and play. His world was not perfect, but it was alive with opportunity, hope, and quiet satisfaction. The general's son often asked questions about him, about what it took to notice and help others, and about the lessons of kindness and courage. She answered simply, sharing what she had learned. That true strength often went unseen, and that noticing and acting could create ripple effects that changed the course of lives. One day, the janitor received a small recognition from the facility for his dedication and care. It was not a grand award, but a certificate and a few kind words from supervisors. He displayed it proudly at home, his son standing beside him, beaming with pride. It was a small acknowledgment of everything he had done, but it meant the world because it was the recognition he had long deserved. As time moved forward, the bond between the general, her son, the janitor, and his child remained quiet but strong. They had come together through circumstance, but the connections they formed were deliberate, grounded in respect and care. Each had learned something vital, that life could be changed with small acts of awareness and action, that seeing people truly mattered, and that courage often appeared in the quietest forms. And so, the janitor's life continued, fuller and more hopeful than it had been before. He had a future to shape, a son to guide, and the knowledge that he was seen, valued, and supported. The general watched this quietly, proud not in the way of authority, but in the quiet joy of knowing she had played a small part in a life transformed. She returned home one evening, sitting with her son, thinking about the impact of a single decision, a single moment of attention. She realized that the unthinkable act, the one that seemed impossible for her, to take that night in the restaurant, had changed more than one life. It had rippled outward, teaching her own son about empathy, strength, and the importance of seeing the world through the eyes of others. The janitor, now confident, capable, and hopeful, would never forget that evening, or the days that followed when someone chose to see him, to believe in him, and to act on that belief. It was a lesson that would stay with him forever, and one he would pass on to his son, that life could change in a moment, sometimes quietly, sometimes unexpectedly, and often because one person chose to notice. The story ended not with fanfare or celebration, but with the quiet reality of lives transformed. A father and son now had a chance to thrive. A mother and her child had learned the power of compassion, and a man who had once gone unseen had found the recognition, support, and hope that allowed him to stand tall at last. Life was not perfect. Challenges would still come, but they had learned something more important, that noticing, caring, and acting, even in small ways, could change the world one life at a time. And sometimes that was enough.